everyone, this is Keith Scott from Apple City, Australia. I'm one of the voices that will let you loose. It's time to watch Relentless and Unstoppable. And so give it up for your main hosts, Douglas Kenney and Andy McPhee.
Right. Well, I thank you for your authenticity. I think sharing your story is amazing. And I just want to go back to, where it all kind of went sour. In high school, what went downhill for you?
What went downhill for me was, for one, I was in the Brad Keselowski phase, but outside of that, though, my situation at high school was tough. I went to high school at Florence High School in Florence, Arizona, and they were a way better school than Estes, but the only downside of it, though, was they were a very rigid system. They had the resources for autism, but the issue was mental health wasn't really known about. And the school was very rigid with their academic structure, and they were also very rigid to some values that I didn't hold, but that they held. And, I wasn't the only one that had complaints about them in high school because, there were some people that obviously didn't enjoy it. And then some did at the time, but later retracted that in later years. But basically, the reason why things went downhill was because, as much as they had a lot of resources for people with autism, my teachers and I, it became toxic because they were deficient in some ways. They were deficient and I was deficient for what, they needed and vice versa. And, at the time I had undiagnosed bipolar and generalized anxiety disorder. And so when they had high standards for me that I wasn't going to be able to make under their system,
Right.
they were left disappointed and, I was left disappointed because I needed more support. That was just the reality is I needed more support. And sometimes in my view, in my perspective, sometimes needing more support is also, you know, knowing when you're in the wrong. In my opinion,
Right.
in my opinion, though, it was just they were focusing more on what I was doing wrong. They were not willing to look in the mirror. You know what I mean? Because there were some parts
Exactly.
about their, because, there were parts about their system that were not effective. They were not, connecting with me and they were not like providing me what I needed to be successful. And so, I sort of look at it as, when you're a teacher and you're above a student, it's easy for you to, you know, point fingers at them all the time, but it's never easy when you hold a position of power to accept when you could very well be part of the problem as well.
Exactly. Exactly. I agree with you. That's amazing that you were willing and able to withstand that adversity.
Uh, Here are my thoughts on it. How do I say this? How do I say this? Well, honestly, Donovan, schooling and me have a complicated history. I hate to say this, but I think schooling is going downhill every year. I don't feel it's anyone's fault. It's how things are playing out at the moment. I think schooling started out for the right reasons, and I think it's a great concept that we came up with. I think the problem schooling is facing these days is simple. I think there's teachers that are negative influences on people for whatever reason. And I had plenty of those types of teachers in school. Just trying to be fair in how I put this, but it's sort of tough to talk about because uh, most of my teachers in school, I liked them as people. I really did like them. But a lot of them were not good teachers to me. And many teachers were not good to some of their other students. I think the issue that schooling is facing is there, there are teachers that are deficient in some ways. And since students have very different needs, as every individual person, I think the result of that is teachers, even the nicest ones, end up causing an unintended message to be sent to them. I highly believe that those deficiencies between students and teachers are a big part of why we're seeing so many students either dropping out, moving to charter schools, graduating, and then getting in trouble with the law, committing suicide, or having rough adulthoods, that no one needs. I think that as much as school is beneficial, there are some casualties with it in the sense that we're we have students paired with teachers that either aren't effective leaders or they don't put up with doing things ethically. My high school years, were very tough because of those, deficiencies. I think schooling would be way better if it was approached the way Andy McPhee and me worked together. My life was pretty much over, without Andy McPhee. My life was not going to progress the way it did. I would have become cynical and non-merciful without God's delivering of Andy to me as a mentor and coach. As I mentioned, I like my teachers personally, from my hilarious high school history teacher to my brief art teacher in high school to my Jamaican math teacher, Mr. White, who I have a funny story about, by the way, and even my weight training instructor. But as teachers, they were not who I needed. I just needed better leadership, I think. And I feel that the years after my graduation has vindicated my position on that. Because once I graduated, I immediately improved as a person and my quality of life once my father was out of the picture and once I was away from my high school's influence. And I hate to say this, but if schooling eventually goes out of business, I'm not going to be satisfied because, it was a good idea, but I'll be relieved for many because I think there will be some students who would be better off without those particular influences surrounding them. It wouldn't be a win for everyone, but it would be a new door opening up to something that could be better, just my opinion. I think schooling is bound to fail unless they approach it like how Andy approached me to it, with compassion, mercy, and grace, and not trying to force all these own different agendas on their students. When I graduated 10 years ago, I was happy, but I wasn't happy for the reasons that people expected. I was more happy in the sense of, being glad that I no longer had to always soft speak on everything and bow down to this and that and be ultra diplomatic to the point of inauthenticity. I think schooling is the right idea, but we're driving students away with our own mistakes and sins as leaders. And I think that can be very detrimental to people as much as it's beneficial for developing knowledge.
Gee, that's all we have for Relentless and Unstoppable. So tune into the next episode to hear more amazing stories from amazing guests. This is Keith Scott from Sydney, Australia saying so long and I'm smarter than the average bear. Gee.